did.
Okay.
But if you can just like put it in the discussion, like in the chat on WebEx. I'm just not logged into Discord, but I can do that. Would it be the link to the article?
The link I was talking about? Yeah, the link to the article.
Oh, okay.
All right. So I click this share button and cool.
Yeah,
that works. We can see
All
it.
right. So I do technically have two articles, but mainly like the second one, I don't want to dive too much into. I just thought it was interesting to add on to the first article. So this one has to do with analyzing academically gifted students among and normative students and how they compare in social anxiety and emotional eating and like the consequences of the social anxiety. So I think one of the big like things people say if you're academically gifted or if you're like a prodigy or something like that, they oftentimes say that you're socially inept or like they would assume that or like they talk about the stress it could have. Now, there's no doubt that it has stress, but this article was analyzing how it actually just compares between normative students and gifted students, and if there even is really that much of a difference. So, this is the abstract that kind of like summarizes here. And with this, obviously they put, what I do like about this article is that all the way towards the bottom, let's see, they put here all the faults that could have been in the experiment. So after explaining all their experiment stuff, they put here that possibly skewed the data. So I think that's just cool. I think that was cool to read. But this whole experiment takes place in a Dutch high school. And they took a mass amount of students and separated the gifted from the normative. And they basically analyzed their anxieties and the impact of their anxieties. And one of the biggest most common consequences of social anxiety or anxiety in general is eating. It's emotional eating. That's one of the biggest ones. And so because of that, they analyzed mainly emotional eating as the consequence. So, let's see here. So after looking at the students and taking the surveys and recording what they had to say, they realized that social anxiety for both groups, obviously that's present in many students, but the social anxiety leading to emotional eating was seen substantially more in the normative students than in the gifted students. And after following that, they then realized that those who were gifted that had anxiety and stuff and such opted to go with far more healthy coping strategies rather than the typical emotional eating. So even though both groups would have it, one group had coping mechanisms that were far more healthy and alternatives, and that was the gifted students, while normative had the more unhealthy and negative coping mechanisms, prominent one being emotional eating. If I'm going too fast with the article, do you want me to put the link in the Discord so you can also look at it?
Would you be able to put the link in the chat here?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. How do I go to the chat? Do I click this one?
It's hard when you're in presentation mode. If you go down to the bottom, let's see here. If you go down to the bottom right of your screen while you're in WebEx, there should be something that looks like a little balloon. There's like an icon with a person, and then just to the right of that, there's an icon that looks like a balloon. If you click on that, that should open the chat. But I don't know if does that show up for you?
I do not see a person.
Okay, so then the other option, I think while you're sharing, it's always more complicated. If you go to the top, there should be like an orange pull down menu when you scroll up to the top in WebEx. I don't know if that shows up for you though.
Oh, should I do stop sharing and then just put in the link?
Yeah, you could do it that way too.
Okay.
Awesome, thanks.
And I'll do the second one. This one, I could explain this one a little bit after, but this one was just had some points to it that I liked or thought was interesting to share. So I'll just put that one too. Sorry, just trying to share it again.
No worries.
Sharing. Okay. So, oh, is it sharing?
Yeah, it is. You're good.
Okay. So here's, I believe this is after the intro. So here's the part where, so this one was saying that intelligence is negatively correlated to amount of emotion-focused coping. And that's what one of this results of this study was. And when it says negative correlated, that means that down here, higher intelligence report lower levels of emotion-focused coping in comparison to normative peers. And as for this one over here, the different gain loss sensitivity, this one I thought was kind of fun to read because what they did for this one was they wanted to look at the social adaptation aspect of gifted students versus their normative peers. And so the difference would be that this one looks at, or this article over here was looking at how they cope and how they just deal with their anxieties. This one looked at how they deal with just socializing. And for this one, what they did with this is that they had a group of the gifted, had a group of the normative, and they had them do social games, basically. And then after looking at it, they would analyze how they interacted with each other. And when I say with each other, I mean normative with normative and gifted with gifted. And this one, I found it fun because when I looked at how at their the results, they found that those who were normative or doing the social games amongst their normative peers were more prone to herd behavior and more prone to being less trusting. So, while the gifted ones were more prone to working together. And I think that this was kind of like addressing how some people believe that if you're a gifted student or in a gifted program, it's very competitive, so everyone's against each other. And I think this one is supposed to be some kind of proof or some kind of research done to see if that kind of if that kind of stereotype, I guess you could say, is true or not. And so if the stereotype is that if you're in a uh, higher program, then it gets more competitive with your other peers. This one showed that they were actually more likely to work together as compared to normative peers who are more distrusting and had their herd group behavior, which is like cliques and forming groups and isolating others. So I just thought this one was really cool, and I wanted to mention that one.
Dina, can I ask a question real quick? Did both of these studies, did both of them define gifted in the same sort of way? And like what criteria did they use to consider a participant gifted versus normative?
Since this one went by IQ, I would assume higher or like actual gifted.
So was it that people with a high IQ were then defined as gifted students?
I mean, not there's a difference between advanced students and gifted students, right? Isn't it usually academically gifted student would be like prodigies and such?
Yeah, I'm like asking you about how they defined it like that.
I did find in two lines from both articles that say that gifted students were the ones that had higher IQ, is what it seems to define as.
Thanks, Upanju. And welcome to the club.
Yeah, thank you.
What made you interested in these two articles? Was it just because of the stereotypes around gifted students, or?
Well, for one thing, my family was having a discussion with one of my or relatives' friends from the Middle East who was considered gifted in one of her biological programs. And when her family had to move here, she had to take some tests because, being from a different country, they want to see how that country's education, what they consider advanced or gifted, how does that compare to what, America might consider advanced or gifted? And she was placed below. And but she seems to have a good understanding of everything. So we were just talking, or my family was just talking about it, like the comparisons of what's gifted. And um, she was also talking about the difference between like socially interacting with her peers in these normal classes for her compared to the others. Now, obviously, you could say the difference would be, going to a different country, but this one seemed more academically because she was brought down to a lower class. So I thought, okay, that's pretty interesting. And so I just started looking up some articles about it, and these two were the ones that I found most interesting.
Do you have any like discussion questions like for us?
I did. I'm trying to find the Google Doc. Sorry.
No, you're good.
I actually stopped sharing for a second to find it on my laptop.
Not to pry too much, but were any of you in gifted classes as high
I
school?
was in advanced, but not gifted.
I remember in elementary school they had like a gifted program for like the little kids, and I was like behind in school because I was late to reading and writing because I couldn't see. But I just like remember that they would like go into other rooms and I would like ask my friends about what they do, and they told me that they just played games. And I was like, "What is this? Like what, because you're gifted, you can play games and I have to do all these like exercises?" Like
Was it like just fun games or like supposed to be mind games or something? Or not mind games,
yeah, it
those
was
like,
yeah, no, it was like mind games, I guess, or like puzzles, like that's what they got to do. And I guess also like they got to like read other stuff, but yeah, I just was so confused about that aspect of like especially in elementary school. I just thought that was so weird.
so like I know, I think my mom and I talked about this once, but in elementary school, we kind of agreed that it's kind of strange for them to have like advanced classes very like pronounced when it's just so unpredictable of how the child might just, you know, do well in school later on. You can do like awful in elementary school, but that doesn't mean anything really. It all kind of depends on how you grow up into middle school and high school.
Yeah.
Like,
Not
does getting
jump-
straight A's in elementary school really mean much?
yeah, I just want to jump in on that. Yeah, I definitely agree with that because I remember in middle school they had this thing for me called Discovery, um, where it's like higher level supposedly reading and like language arts and everything. I didn't place into that, nor did I place into like I think there was like Magnet, which excites you in math. But like starting from high school, I just was doing better than the kids who did place in there. So it's like not even just from elementary school. It can like start like when you're in those lower grade levels. You can develop in different ways. So those gifted programs, you know, and I'm not saying they don't mean much, but like they're not completely accurate to how
Yeah.
a child can turn out.
Nellie,
really
because you're a professor and everything, um, have you ever were you ever told about why there are gifted programs or no? Oh, okay.
By the time folks come to college, I don't know anything about the academic history of students I get get in my classes unless they wish to divulge that and share that with me. But I don't know, and it's different in different countries too. When I was a kid, I lived in England for a year, and I remember in first grade there was a very strict hierarchy in terms of what level you were considered to be. And it was more strict than what I had experienced here, where even in the classroom, they had, this is the table for the students who are really excelling. And then this is the average students. And these are I'm going to put in quotes, these are the dumb students. And they kept those as your study groups and like the groups that you did work with. So I don't know. There's a part of me that's skeptical, and that's why I asked Dina like how they determined if students were gifted, because there's a part of me that's skeptical and wonders like, does gifted just mean that as a young kid you know how to follow rules and do what adults want you to do, versus having some kind of aptitude that sets you apart from other students. I don't know if that answered your question, Marion.
Yeah, no, it did. I was just, I guess, curious on your personal experience.
And I will also say, as a professor, I think sometimes those labels are detrimental as people come into college, because I think it reinforces the idea that you are born smart and that it's not a matter of hard work. I have a lot of students who come into the science classes saying, "Oh, I'm not good at science. I don't get it." And I think to myself, it's not that you're good or not good at science. anything you're good at takes practice, right? And anything you start out with, you stink at because you're starting out with it. And unfortunately, I think that those labels, again, in elementary school and junior high and high school, get reinforced as people come to college, where they start to think, well, I can't do it because I'm not smart enough, instead of thinking, I can do it, I just need to spend more time figuring out how to do it. That's my 2 cents. I'll shut up now.
That makes a lot of sense. I agree with them.
Do you think that, so like you said, like when they put them into groups, right? That obviously like kind of like sets them for life in their head, basically, like if you're smart enough or not. So would you say that they then did like stereotypes on students then? If they put this image in their head, does that mean that they also just kind of went with stereotypes of how that image would be?
Are you asking me or everybody as a whole?
Yeah, like anyone else. Anyone wants to put in their own 2 cents then.
I mean, personally speaking, from like I guess, and it is more anecdotal, obviously, but I feel like the people. This doesn't apply to everybody that I've known throughout high school and everything. But I do feel like I noticed some sort of like entitlement from the people who are in supposedly advanced classes. It's not like, of course, it differs from person to person. But I think most of those students try to be modest about it. But yeah, I do think it is self-reinforcing as you go throughout the educational system.
Yeah, I know, like, for me, I almost, like, felt belittled, if that's a word, like, because it's like these people were advanced and that's it. Like, and you couldn't, like, I felt like that's just, like, how it was, and you couldn't, like, move up or anything. So I felt like, the system is almost against me, but obviously, like, they want you to improve, but just, like, with that, with you already being categorized as, like, this, it's almost like, okay, I guess that's what I am, and there's nothing I can, like, do about it.
So would you say, do you think that, so this article that I said, that was on Dutch, right? Dutch is a Dutch high school is obviously going to be different from an American high school. So do you think that like socially that's different? Like what you might read in this article of how the gifted students cooperate, of how the normative students cooperate is going to be way different from how an American school does it? Or do you think it's going to be like somewhat the same? Because what was interesting was that I tried to find one on an American school, like a scholar article like this for an American school, but only I saw one for Dutch, and that's why I went with that one. I wish I found one for American schools. It would have been a lot more interesting, I guess, because we're in America. But so for this one, it was said that the normative group showed what was the statistic? Sorry, just 1 second. It showed 15% cooperation with each other, right? While the gifted, academically gifted, showed 50% cooperation. That's a huge difference. So do you think that that could be believable if it were an American school, or do you think it would be a whole lot different? Because obviously it shows in this article that gifted students, at least in this Dutch high school, were way more prone to be cooperative together.
I feel like clicks are found everywhere, so I can see how um, that was present. I, I would, I don't know, I don't want to assume that, like, the schools in, the high schools, like the Dutch high schools, that they are scheduled like how our high schools are scheduled, like with classes like back to back. I don't know where I was going with that, but I see the cliques still being there.
There's no doubt that cliques are everywhere. Even like I'm pretty sure at all our high schools we can tell when there's some kind of clique. But just because you're in a clique doesn't mean you would fail to cooperate with other people. This could be brought back to like, do you think in America or in American society, high schools kind of set you up to be competitive towards your peers? Or do you think it's not really like that or as bad? Because that could maybe like it does depend on might depend on the society, right? If America has a huge foundation on their education system that goes about you being the best or you being number one, then that could definitely set this data apart than it would from a Dutch high school. Like I know for a fact in South Korea, their competitiveness with their high schools is pretty astronomical. Now, I wish I found one that kind of showed it in America. Couldn't really find it, unfortunately, so I just went with this one. But yeah.
Really quickly backtracking to your question of like, or responding to your question about how it would be like in America. I think compared because first world countries, I feel like they have like similar, I guess, like ways of thinking. I think it is more individualistic in just first world countries in general. Maybe it's more reinforced in America. But I feel like the different, like if there's any differences between the Dutch study versus if there were to be an American study, I think it wouldn't be as big of a difference as if the same study were conducted in like an Asian country, where maybe
Yeah.
the cooperation could be higher since it is more like collectivistic.
It's good that you mentioned the first world thing because that's actually what was going through my mind when I settled with this article because I thought, well, Dutch is a more Western first world or Western first world. I thought, how different could it be? Obviously, there's going to be some difference, but I thought maybe the schooling has to have some kind of more similar than if I were to look at a South Korean article on it, which is why I went with Dutch because it was more first world and Western. So it's cool that you mentioned that one.
That's fair.
I'll share with you guys anecdotally. 2 years ago, I went to a conference that was about race and ethnicity in higher education. And one of the sessions I went to was about student success in STEM courses. And specifically what they were looking at was the question you posed, Dina, about the competitive nature of STEM courses at the undergraduate level and at US colleges. And the people presenting, and they were not scientists, let me say that first, they weren't scientists, but they proposed that, the reason I think they had a school that had a very high Asian/Pacific Islander population, and they were saying that culturally, it was difficult for those students to be in STEM courses because of this very focus on individual success and individual achievement. And so they developed like this cohort mentoring program where the students were less competing with each other, but more so they were working with each other in their STEM courses, and they found much higher success rates among that particular population of students. So I do wonder if there's something to be said with, do we cultivate a competitive nature, and is that detrimental to some groups?
That's cool. And in one of the articles, they were talking about how there was naturally like more lower trust amongst more normative. But when I read that part, I thought, because usually like you'd think, oh, if you're in more of a STEM field or a higher up, you'd be more competitive towards your peers. But in this article specifically, it was talking about just lower trust in the normative. Do you think that lower trust between their peers could be the fact that if they're all kind of told they're not special, that kind of gives them this need to be apart from others, and that could make that competitive and normative trust higher in this statistic or in this project that they did? Because like if you're all told that you're normal, one of you want to stand out. So maybe that's why there's more lower trust and more competitiveness in that statistic. that they did.
Yeah, maybe it's like you know, yeah, like what you said, like they're told that they're all normal, so then they feel like they have to prove to like the people that they're around that like, you know, because it feels good to be special. So I feel like maybe the people, I don't know, were they told that they were just like part of the normal group or
Yes, they're categorized. So they would do like, we're doing a project. This is the category for the normal. They had like, I forgot the number of how they, but they did separate the groups.
mm-hmm. Then yeah, maybe they just felt like they had to like fend for themselves or
Yeah, and
prove,
especially if you're told you're gonna be in a like a research project, yeah, you're definitely gonna wanna
yeah,
up your
like to
game.
prove yourself.
So actually, that could actually be a flaw that they could mention in their and one of their end paragraphs that, you know, knowing you're in an intelligence like analyzing game, obviously it's going to affect how you would normally do it on a day-to-day basis.
I don't know about you guys, but usually when I'm surrounded by a lot of like really smart people or someone that's better than me in a particular thing, it kind of makes me want to try harder and work. You know, I think that's a natural human inclination to want to be the best version of yourself and be the best at any particular thing. So I think it's just a natural, innate thing that we just gravitate towards trying to keep up with someone that might be better at something than us. So that might be what's happening there as well.
It's cool. Is self-fulfilling prophecy when like if you tell a kid they're dumb, so then they start to believe they're dumb and then they just do dumb stuff? Okay. Just making sure. I don't know. I may have taken sociology, but I don't remember every single theory. Yeah, it is really important to take that into account. This one, it did say that the ones who were more academically gifted had the better. Um, and if I'm going to talk about personal experience, I would say in the advanced classes that I've been in, it was usually this group of smart kids that worked well together to get the job done. But of course, that can't be applied to every person's experience or whatnot. But from if I'm gonna like try to like connect to that, I'd say in all the advanced courses I've been in, it's usually the smart group that would just pull together more. Do any of you guys have an experience that's the opposite?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of one advanced class that I was in. It was like a Spanish 4, I think, but like it was for people who were you know more who started Spanish earlier and were like accelerating faster. I don't know. It's the exact opposite of how I'd expect, more the smarter kids to behave, which was odd. Basically, it's like a lot of the time, even if no matter who was paired up, whether it was like the smart kids or the smart like average kid or whatever, in the terms we're speaking, it's just I can never predict how well they'd work together. So that was the only class I've been in. That was just like I was so confused. I'm like, okay, because nobody wanted to like practice Spanish as much as I did. But then there were some people who like wanted to do it, and I'm just like I didn't know. And there are smart kids who goofed off a lot of the time as well. So yeah, that's like the one experience I've had where it's just I had no clue how any two people in the class would work together. So
what about in general? Does anyone have any personal experiences that were the complete opposite to what this article was saying? Other than your awesome example. But you also did mention that it was a Spanish class. Do you think a Spanish class might be different from how it would be in a STEM class?
sorry, you cut out. What was your question?
I said, do you think that since it was a Spanish class, do you think a language class might be different from how it would be in a STEM class?
Yeah, I think it is different because of the language class. Because I think if it was a STEM class, and you were assigned a project, and there's like a clear like a deadline, and there are constraints and everything like normal, then I feel like cooperation is kind of necessary. Eventually, at some point you have to start working together, and not goof off in the STEM class. So I feel like because it was a Spanish class, maybe it was just something everybody needed to get out of the way, or they just wanted to do maybe to get that college credit from the class. Maybe that's why it was a little bit more unpredictable. But yeah, it would be different. Maybe more streamlined to how the article says. More academic gifted students might interact with each other. So yeah.
I'm going back to that article, Dina, that you had with the being gifted and the anxiety and eating, emotional eating, because what I'm kind of curious about is they were taking students currently as they are. So like you're a gifted student, you're in a gifted class, whatever, and your levels of anxiety were not as high as the normative students. But I kind of wonder what would happen if they looked at those same groups like 20 years later. Would they find that the anxiety levels between the two groups would differ still? And would it still differ with the normative group having higher anxiety, or would it be the opposite? I mean, it's interesting to look at one snapshot in time, but over several periods of time.
I really like your question because I actually thought of something kind of similar like a while ago when I was like just first beginning to pull up these articles. But I actually once thought, again, this is just my personal like thought of how it would go or thought process. I have no way researched if this is even true or not. So, I always kind of thought that if you were the very smart kid or the very smart student, eventually like that's kind of like your peak. Or usually it's when you are at your highest academically where you kind of feel like you're at your peak. So afterwards, once you get a stable job, you got your education, you finished it all, then it's kind of like a plateau after that, kind of. So I always thought maybe when you reach your peak as a student of being the gifted one, would that give you anxiety later on if you're no longer that gifted student because it's come and passed? But then again, you could also say that many gifted students are aware that they are a gifted student and have to and understand that, later on in life, they're probably going to just stay where they are. Because, you as a gifted student, once you become an adult and you're no longer a student, you kind of like, you're still gifted, but just no longer that student of the school. So unless, like, if you were the type of person who wasn't like taught that your worth isn't attached to your title as a student, then I would suspect that their anxiety levels after 20 years would be way different. But if they have that healthy mindset, then I think they'll be okay.
So I will share something from personal experience with you all. I do not share this with many people, but so in my experience, in high school, I went to school in Southern Indiana, so let me qualify by saying that, where the education system wasn't the greatest. So in Southern Indiana, I was considered a good student. And there's a certain level of confidence that comes from being recognized as being a good student or doing well in school. And I think that ingrained in me I compared myself to my peers quite a bit, right? And in high school, that worked well for me because I was like, yeah, I'm doing better than my peers. As I've kind of gone into adulthood and, get my own job and especially have a job with a lot of autonomy, there's nobody to compare myself with, right? And so that's, I think, anxiety inducing because I don't know, like in high school, I kind of knew where do I stack up with
Where
my
you
peers?
are on the
Right.
scale.
Right, exactly. And even in college, I don't know if they do this on Harper transcripts, but on my college, at the end of the semester, when you would get your grades, it would not only show your grade, but it would show the grades of the whole course, like everybody in the course. So you could see, like, hey, did I score better than everybody else? Or like, was I average or did I score on the low end? So I still had that ability to compare myself to others. But again, the second that stopped, which is really when I entered the workforce, for me, that's when anxiety shot up. So again, that's just my own personal anecdote.
I'm not sure if this is a Harper College thing, but until 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when one of my professors talked to me about how well my class did compared to his other classes, I realized that was the only time throughout my 3 semesters here at Harper where a teacher mentioned other students' like performance. And I have video chats with lots of teachers and lots of emails, lots of discussions. So it's not like a lack of communication with teachers that I rarely hear about how the other students are doing. It was just at that one time I would realize like, wow, there are other students that did like so I just thought that was so interesting because in high school they definitely let us know if we were if we did one of the better compared to the others. So maybe it's a Harper thing. I think it would be positive if it was a Harper thing because, why do you have to know how other people did? It's just gonna make you having to like you said, that trait of comparing yourself to others. So, yeah, like not once here have I ever really heard how other students were doing in comparison to me, that is.
What I find interesting about your story where, after entering the workforce, your anxiety shot up after not being able to compare yourself. What I find interesting is that I think intuitively, I think it'd be the opposite, where it's like, because for me, when I was in high school, obviously it's only my first semester in Harper, but it feels my anxiety is way lowered because I don't have to compare myself to others. So that was interesting to me. Yeah, so I just wanted to add that. Before we move on.
It could be the way my weird mind works. Maybe for most people, being relieved of comparing yourself from others is a relief. But
yeah. Oh, and also what you were talking about, how do you pronounce your first name? Is it Dina?
Dina, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I don't want to mispronounce it. Okay. What's it called? Yeah, I've noticed even in just the first 10 weeks here that the other classes aren't really talked about, or other sections even aren't really talked about as much. It's more, maybe it's just because I'm taking more online classes this semester. But it definitely does feel just more like individual growth, and being able to do well individually rather than comparing yourself to others and how they're doing. I think it's definitely much different than high school in that regard.
Yeah,
And
I
I
also
don't
feel
know
like there's
if
like a difference. Oh, sorry, I was just gonna quickly
You go
say how
first,
I
I'm
think
talking
there's
too
a
much.
difference with like STEM classes and then humanities and literature classes, because I know for my STEM classes, like chemistry, especially chemistry, and maybe a little bit biology, but they would be like, this was the average. So you had like a sense of what other students were doing, like how they were doing. Um, but it's still like I feel kind of like the opposite with Nelly. It's like um, if like before with last year everything was online and I only knew how like I was doing, and so I didn't feel like this anxiety as much. But now that like I'm in person and I see people that I know, and I'm kind of like doing projects with them, and I just I'm like, oh, I got to do better, or like I have to do this, not so much like self improvement, like just knowing that there's other people in my class that might be doing better than me. It kind of like it gives me anxiety because I want to be like as good as I can be. But I just feel like with STEM, I feel like it's a lot more competitive, or like, you know, this is how you should be doing, and if you're not doing, like if you're not above the average, or like this is the lowest I've seen for tests, like you need to step it up, which I understand is probably like motivation. But I'm like, I just like can't I like subsequently like compare myself to then like that average, and then that, you know, so I don't know.
I don't know if you guys had this in middle school, but in my middle school, they would tape the grades of all the students in the class on the day that they would show you your grades. Yeah, they tape it. I would walk in. I remember one of my math classes, we walked in there, and right as you walk in, you see everyone's grades taped on the door. And I would like refuse to look at anyone else's but my own, and not even because of comparison, but just out of like I don't want, like if someone did bad, they don't want anyone looking at that. So of course I wouldn't look at any bad grades. I'm like, poor person, like they don't need that displayed. But that was in middle school. High school, they never did that, thankfully. But they still would say what the average was. They would still say, oh, half the class did this, or like half the class got like a C or something like that, or half the class did this bad, or half the class did this good. But yeah, in middle school, they would show it. They had no, they didn't do privacy. Um, High school was kind of like in between, still talked about it. In college, I haven't heard anything really. So maybe again, this is my own experience, but from my life, it seemed that as a child, they were more publicly towards what you got, and towards as I went through higher grades, they started not being so open about what you got to other students. Like, it's your grade, that's your personal info. Which honestly is great because I did not like having my grades taped up on the freaking lockers. Okay, that's really cool. It's always awesome to see like an opposite opinion.
Ananth, if it makes you feel any better, they're planning for 75% of the courses at Harper to have a on-campus component for the spring semester. So if you're going to be here again in the spring, you might have your chance for some on-campus classes.
I would love it to be on campus again, though.
I know this is like kind of off topic, but I just like wonder how COVID may have like shifted people's understanding like with academics and how like because you're not in like that environment, if people are now like excelling or or it's like kind of like what Ananth was saying, how it's been hard because he doesn't have peers around to like work with. While I know for someone like one of my really good friends, like now that they're online, they're not as like easily distracted, or they now feel like actually like self-motivated to do stuff. And yeah, I don't know. Just thought that was weird.
I personally feel like online, especially for STEM, I did way better. Like my chemistry class from last semester was all online. It was so like just hard for me to get through it all. This semester, chemistry is on campus or partial, but still like once in a while on campus. And I can't even explain how nice it feels, like in comparison to the online. And while I actually don't mind any other class really aside from us being online, but just in my opinion, like the chemistry and the bio labs, it was just so much better in person. It just made so much more sense. And it was just nice to be around people, even if you don't talk to them. It's just nice to be around people too. And that was
Did you cut out?
Yeah, seems like she cut out. We anyways have 3 minutes left, so oh, she's back.
I'm sorry, what were you saying?
You
Oh,
had cut out on us.
oh.
But we only have
So
a
yeah,
few
that was
minutes
actually the
left.
first time where I was told about how other students were doing, and obviously it's because we are around other students. But yeah, I'd say like that would be one problem I would have with having students being like in class, because I'm very pro like don't let people know how others' grades are doing or how the class is doing. Like no doubt that could really boost up your self-esteem if you're like in the higher percentile. But even then, if you're in the lower, it's just so harsh. And I just, even if I'm in the high percentile, I know that's just harsh.